everybody. Welcome back to the Mindful of You podcast. This is episode 71, Cognitive Distortions, part 2. I'm super excited to be talking with you guys today and continue on with this series. I think there's a lot of practical advice when it comes to cognitive distortions that can be really helpful. One thing I want to point out is our thinking isn't always distorted. Sometimes we have great reason to be feeling what we're feeling. Actually, we always have great reason for feeling what we're feeling, even if there is some distorted thinking going on. And the reason I bring this up is because it's something that I've started to recognize is that as much as promoting like learning how to look at your thinking and look at your behavior is so important, I also don't want people to forget that sometimes life is just hard. And I think I've acknowledged this on the podcast a few times, but I just wanted to emphasize it today because it's been on my mind that sometimes things are just hard. Sometimes relationships are hard or whatever it may be that's challenging you. Sometimes there's no need to change the thinking. You may just be having a hard time, and that's totally okay. Next week, I'm going to talk a lot more about that. I'm going to be going over Neil L. Anderson's talk from an LDS General Conference called Wounded, and we will be chatting about that subject a little bit more, so make sure you tune in next week. Okay, but to talk about these cognitive distortions, this can be so helpful, especially if there's a situation where you don't want to be feeling the way you are and the suffering seems unnecessary, or you can kind of pinpoint a pattern in your thoughts. This can be incredibly helpful. So I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to do 5 again today. The first one we're going to talk about is jumping to conclusions. When you jump to conclusions, you interpret an event or situation negatively without evidence supporting such a conclusion. Then you react to your assumption. So if you weren't here for part 1 of cognitive distortions, make sure you check it out. I will link it at the end of this video. But in that, I talked about how I'm familiar with all these cognitive distortions, but the specific examples and definitions I'm pulling from are from Psych Central. So they're linked in the description if you want to check out the direct link. So this is one I am for sure guilty of, even in this exact same situation that the example brings up. So this first example is your partner comes home looking serious. Instead of asking how they are, you immediately assume they're mad at you. Consequently, you keep your distance. In reality, your partner had a bad day at work. It's so easy to interpret someone's behavior as having something to do with you. That's also very common with the mind reading distortion, is we think we know why people are acting the way that they are. And we might be able to infer, and we even might be right some or most of the time, but truly we don't know how someone is feeling. I had a conversation with my husband today, and I'd been jumping to a conclusion about what he'd been feeling, and he told me like those thoughts had never crossed his mind. So it's important to communicate and ask rather than jump to conclusions. So if the asking becomes excessive, then that might be a little bit of an OCD link, but doing it occasionally is pretty normal and healthy. Okay, awesome. Our next one is personalization. Personalization leads you to believe that you're responsible for events that in reality are completely or partially out of your control. This cognitive distortion often results in you feeling guilty or assigning blame without contemplating all the factors involved. The example is your child has an accident and you blame yourself for allowing them to go to that party. We can always go back and be like, what if I had done this? What if I had done this? But in reality, if you were doing something completely innocent or you didn't do anything at all, for the most part, it probably is not your fault. So just keep that in mind if you are taking personal responsibility for the suffering that's happening in your life, but especially I think in somebody else's life. If your partner is upset or sad and you're personalizing that when it may or may not have anything to do with you, let them own their emotions. Same with your children, same with your in-laws. Not everything has to do with you. This is a lesson that I learn over and over again, is that we're all on our own individual journeys. And even if you have offended someone, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take responsibility for your part in that. But their emotions are their own. And so you don't need to personalize everything somebody else is feeling. So, okay, awesome. Jumping forward to control fallacies. The word fallacy refers to an illusion, misconception, or error. Control fallacies can go two opposite ways. You either feel responsible or in control of everything in yours and other people's lives, or you feel you have no control at all over anything in your life. Oh, that one's fascinating. I don't think I've ever heard of that one before. That's interesting how there's the two poles of that. So you either feel responsible or in control of everything, or you feel you have no control at all over anything in your life. And I can see how both of those could be really dangerous. I definitely lean more to I feel like I'm responsible or in control of everything in my life. That's why I did a podcast episode called Your Circle of Control. That was like, way back in the OG days. I think it might be one of my pillars. But check out that episode if you feel like you struggle with trying to control everything that's happening in your life, and that might be helpful for you. Feeling like you have no control at all can be dangerous, because if you can't take responsibility for something, then it's really hard to make progress. We can be in really, really difficult situations in life where maybe some choices are taken from us. But it's important to look at our individual situations and see, what do I have control over? What don't I have control over? And accept what you don't have control over, and then own what you do have control over. And obviously there's going to be some nuance within that. And you might have a hard time deciding if you have control over something or not. But where possible, try and take ownership and own what you can control, accept what you can't. Okay. The fallacy of fairness. I saw this one in advance, and I was like, oh, this is going to call me out. The definition is a little long, so hang with me. This cognitive distortion refers to measuring every behavior and situation on a scale of fairness. Oh, me. Finding that other people don't assign the same value of fairness to the event makes you resentful. In other words, you believe you know what's fair and what isn't, and it upsets you when people disagree with you. The fallacy of fairness will lead you to face conflict with certain people and situations because you feel the need for everything to be fair according to your own parameters. But fairness is rarely absolute and can often be self-serving. Oh, knife in the heart. Yeah, I really struggle with this in my marriage, and it is only very recently starting to improve, to be honest. I always felt like I needed to make sure there was an absolutely even division of labor. And my family would tell me, like, who have been married much longer than me, like, that's not how it works, like sometimes one person takes on more than the other, and then you share. I think I just have this like root fear of like being an oppressed housewife. And I really don't want that. And so I felt this need to be like, let's make sure there's absolute fairness and balance. But one, that's impossible to achieve. And two, it's also like a really negative place to come from in a marriage, because I'm not trying to serve him or love him or, be there for him in those difficult things. And recently I started to recognize like, oh gosh, like I need to step it up. And like, I feel like, I actually have an incredible husband who does many things. And I actually don't need to be counting or keeping score to make sure that he's doing things. He does it on his own. And I don't know if any of that has been influenced by me, like trying to count or keep score in the past. But I found like, hey, I actually feel like I might need to step up a little bit here and do a little bit more, seeing everything my husband is doing. But it's coming from a much better place, because I don't feel like I'm doing it in an effort to try and make things even, at least most of the time. But because I see how much he's serving and giving to me and giving to our household and to our lives, it makes me want to do the same for him. I also think this fallacy can apply to, like social issues. I think that there's a lot of people who have like this level of compassion that is wonderful. But we can also drive ourselves crazy hoping or wishing or needing everything to be fair for everybody in life, because it's not. That doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for social change. I just don't want it to weigh you down all of the time. I think it's appropriate for it to weigh you down or weigh me down some of the time when we see things that we feel are unjust. But trying to make things fair for everybody, everywhere, is an impossible task. And so bite off what you can chew, do your part, and speak up. But try not to let that burden weigh you down if it's heavy or it hurts. Okay, awesome. This one is blaming. Blaming refers to making others responsible for how you feel. You made me feel bad is what usually defines this cognitive distortion. However, even when others engage in hurtful behaviors, you're still in control of how you feel in most situations. This distortion comes from believing that others have the power to affect your life, even more so than yourself. Example, your partner comments on your new dress and you feel upset for the rest of the day. You make me feel bad about myself, you tell them. This one's interesting. I don't know if I like how they phrased it, but I can see where they're coming from. It is true that we're in charge of our feelings, but like I was talking about earlier in the podcast, sometimes we have good reason for feeling what we feel. But I think what's important with this particular cognitive distortion is in the example says you feel upset for the rest of the day. I don't know if it would be appropriate to let something like that rule your entire day. But I also think it's important that our partners or whoever it may be that we did feel offended by are aware of our feelings. That's got so much nuance and gray area, so I hesitate to say it with so much certainty. But for the most part, I think it's healthy to communicate when we feel hurt by something somebody did or said. But I think some of the other cognitive distortions can inform whether it needs to be a conversation. Like, are we personalizing something that shouldn't be personalized? For example, if our partner comes home angry or, is frustrated, it's like, we don't necessarily need to say you're making me feel bad, because that's outside of us, especially if that feeling is not directed towards us. It's just something that they're experiencing on their own. Then that's not super fair. But I think that, if you look at the situation somewhat logically or rationally as much as you can, since emotions aren't always rational or logical, and you feel like, you know what? No, I don't think that was okay. That hurt my feelings. I want them to know that. I think that can be appropriate in a lot of situations. And so maybe don't let it ruin your day, but also if you do feel hurt, I don't necessarily know if that's a cognitive distortion to blame them. So a little bit of nuance to end this episode. I really appreciate you guys listening. If you've been listening for a while or you enjoy the podcast, please leave me a review. It really helps me. I'm so looking forward to talking to you guys next week about Neil L. Anderson's talk. I think what he says is so helpful and compassionate, and honestly, it just has a different feel as far as conference talks goes. It's very sensitive and compassionate. So excited to share that with you, and I will talk to you then. Bye-bye.